Hello everybody and welcome to the Winecast. Having had a look at the Languedoc in the last cast, it's time to tackle the second half of that winemaking region, the Roussillon. The Roussillon is smaller than its appellation mate, so it will be a little more straightforward and easy to deal with, but there's still a lot going on in this area and its wines are very worth checking out. Though it's currently a part of the modern nation of France, the Roussillon has ties, historical, cultural, and linguistic ties, of long standing with Spain, and more specifically with Catalonia to the south. For much of its history after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, it's either been ruled directly or allied with states on the other side of the Pyrenees, and even after it became an official part of France in 1659, its culture was really just an extension of Catalan culture, and Catalan was the dominant language. Though the influence of Catalan culture and language have diminished somewhat since the arrival of more new residents from all over France as the region has industrialized and grown, in the eyes of most of its residents, the Roussillon is northern Catalonia. About half a century after it entered France, though, the region was renamed and slightly restructured as the French department of Pyrénées-Orientales, or the Eastern Pyrenees, a name that it retains to this day. This relative isolation from the rest of France, both cultural and, as you can see from the map, geographic, had several effects on the local wine culture, one of the biggest being that the Roussillon was relatively late in adopting technological innovations in winemaking when compared to other regions in France. The Roussillon is connected to the Languedoc and shares a lot with that larger region. Bureaucratically, both regions share the Languedoc AOC and the Pays d'Oc IGP, allowing producers working with either of those appellations to pull grapes from throughout the area. As in the Languedoc, production by wine cooperatives is a big deal. Bigger, in fact, than in the Languedoc, with 75% of Roussillon wines produced by cooperatives, as opposed to around two-thirds of Languedoc wines. The two regions also share an emphasis on grapes with either a Rhone or Spanish heritage connection. And again, that emphasis is even more pronounced in the smaller, closer to Spain Roussillon. Finally, like their neighbors just to the north, the folks in the Roussillon love themselves some Vin Doux Naturel, but once again, even more than the folks in the Languedoc do, with the Roussillon responsible for about 80% of France's total VDN production. I mentioned grapes briefly, and it's worth taking a little closer look at what's grown in the Roussillon. Though thanks to the shared AOC and IGP, producers in the Roussillon can theoretically work with all the same grapes available to Languedoc producers, the actual number of varietals planted in the Roussillon is about a third the number of what's planted throughout the whole region, with some 20-plus varietals in the ground. Overwhelmingly, these belong to the Rhone Spanish family as opposed to the Bordelais and other French grapes you see in parts of the Languedoc, with the big dogs among the reds being Grenache, Carignan, Mourvèdre, Syrah, Cinsault, and a clonal variation of Grenache, Lardonnere or Liédonner Bellout, that's also permitted in the Languedoc but features more prominently in the Roussillon. And among the whites, Grenache Blanc, Macabeo, Roussanne, Marsanne, Rolle, also known as Vermentino, and a Spanish origin grape, Tourbat, or Malvoisie de Roussillon, that's only authorized for Roussillon production. In terms of production, the main AOC is Côte du Roussillon, shown in purple on the map that covers the entire region. Wines made under this AOC must be blends. Reds, rosés, and whites are produced, with red being far and away the dominant style. Côte du Roussillon Village occupies a smaller area to the north, about a third the size of the total appellation, and shown in red. Like other village appellations in France, the standards for viticulture and production are a little stricter here, and thus the village designation is associated with greater quality. Only reds are authorized for production under this AOC that, like in the main appellation, must be blends. And among the various villages that have access to this AOC because of where they're located, there are 4 that can append their names to this AOC designation on the label, signaling an especially high reputation for quality. So be on the lookout for La Tour de France, Caramani, Lescairde, and Totavel. The Maury AOC actually sits on top of the Village appellation, and it's authorized to produce both dry, unfortified wines and Vin Doux Naturel. The unfortified wines will be dry reds, and the VDNs can be made either red or white. At the very south end of the Roussillon is a production area set aside for the Collioure and Bagnoul AOCs. Both of these AOCs have an identical area that they encompass, but under Collioure, only unfortified dry wines are produced, while Bagnoul produces Vin Doux Naturel. Both appellations produce their respective wines in red, white, and rosé styles. Finally, a large production area that takes in most of the main Côte de Roussillon production area, including all of the village area, and that's identified by the yellow line on the map, is set aside for Rive Salt, that makes only Vin Doux Naturel in red and white, and for Muscat de Rive Salt, that makes them with Muscat. Since, like I said at the beginning of the cast, the VDNs are a big deal, let's say a little more about them. There are 5 appellations for producing them in the Roussillon, the 4 we just mentioned, Maury, Rive Salt, Muscat de Rive Salt, and Bagnoul, as well as a Grand Cru appellation within Bagnoul with stricter production and aging standards. Red and rosé VDNs from these areas will be driven by Grenache, perhaps with a little support from the other red grapes used to make unfortified wines in the Roussillon. Whites that don't have Muscat in the AOC designation, like Bagnoul for example, will be made with the standard Roussillon whites that we've already discussed, but occasionally will include Muscat as well. Muscat de Rive Salt, the only Roussillon appellation to have Muscat in the name, is made from that grape, either the Petit Grand variety, like in the Languedoc VDNs, or from another grape, Muscat d'Alexandrie, that's not used in the Languedoc. You'll find VDNs made in either a reductive or an oxidative style. If you remember the cast on the Jura, wines made oxidatively are made in a way that promotes exposure to oxygen and results in a particular suite of aromas and flavors that reflects this exposure, including nutty and dried fruit notes and what's sometimes described as an overall sherry-like quality. By contrast, reductively made wines have their exposure to oxygen severely limited, and they end up with more pronounced fresh fruit and floral aromas and flavors. How do you know which one you're getting when you buy a bottle? Unfortunately, the labeling protocols can vary from appellation to appellation, and there's a fair number of terms for the various treatments depending on whether it's a red, white, or rosé. But here's a quick attempt at making some sense out of the language. If a red VDN is labeled Grenache, or in Bagnoul, Rimage, it's been made reductively. For whites, the reductive designation is Blanc, or in Muscat de Rive Salt, Muscat. Rosés are not made oxidatively, so if it says rosé, it's reductive. If a red is designated as Thuillier, it will be oxidative, just like a white designated Ambré. You'll see the term rancio on some oxidative VDNs, and that means that the wine has had an extremely oxidative treatment, possibly including direct sun exposure or high heat exposure that could actually matterize the wine, as we talked about in the cast on Madeira. And if you really want to be sure that you're drifting into Madeira country with your VDN, then look for hordage on the label. That indicates that the wine has had an oxidative treatment, usually an extremely oxidative treatment, for a minimum of 5 years. Keep in mind, though, that these terms, as far as I can tell, are optional for producers to use. But my sense is that if you don't see one of these designations on the label, you can let your working assumption be that the wine was made reductively, unless something else suggests otherwise. Finally, as with the Languedoc, don't forget the IGPs. We've already covered that the Roussillon can use the regional Pays d'Oc IGP. And the departmental IGP for the Roussillon is named in honor of the region's Catalonian heritage and is called the Côte Catalane IGP, which you may still see identified by the older Vin de Pays nomenclature. There's also a small IGP, the Côte Vermeille, that covers the same production area as Collioure and Bagnoul and makes red, white, and rosé in a conventional style, as well as in a highly oxidized rancio style and a Sourd-Mûrie style made from very ripe, often partially dried grapes. Thanks again for joining me for another Winecast. I hope this cast left you with a greater familiarity and a higher comfort level with the Roussillon, and I hope the last cast did the same for the Languedoc. If this cast was helpful, interesting, and/or enjoyable, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks to all my subscribers and to everyone who's just taken the time to have a look and listen, and please don't be shy about leaving a comment, question, or request. I'm your host, the Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.